Recording is on.
All right. So thanks everybody for joining. The last thing I'm going to just share in the chat is the kind of the agenda. Very rough agenda. But to just give us a kind of idea. I'll just introduce myself really quick. My name's Gaehring. I'm a member of the Skywoman community, and also a engineer at Farm OS, it's open source farm record keeping. We have Nate Chang here, who is a UX designer and data strategist who's going to help facilitate. And we're speaking with Kip Curtis at Ohio State University, Marion, who conducts the Microfarm project there, along with the team at Richland Gro-Op in Richland, Ohio, who's represented today by Walt Bonham and Jess Hudson and Matthew Stanfield here. So the general purpose is to look at, aggregation services and what, how those operations work for kind of tried and true operations like Richland Gro-Op, through the help of the Microfarm project. I think, Nate, are you comfortable sharing your screen, or do you have the permissions? Great.
Y'all seeing this?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So I was thinking, if we want to just take like five minutes here to just maybe run through, maybe start with Kip and Kip, pass the mic to your colleagues. Just give a quick rundown of where you're coming from.
All right. Nice to meet all of you. My name's Kip Curtis. I'm an associate professor of environmental history at the Ohio State Mansfield regional campus. And about 5 years ago, I got thinking about how to kind of leverage urban agriculture into agriculture. It seemed to me that it was kind of foundering on a couple of shoals. One of them was the fact that it's not easy to grow, and there wasn't a lot of support for farmers. But then the support came in, and the reality of the marketplace often stood in the way of success. So I conceived of an approach that standardized the urban farming footprint. We call that the microfarm. It's about 6,000 to 8,000 square feet of growing area. About half of it is in passive heated solar high tunnels. And the calculus for that was based on idealized crop yields over square footage over 12 months of growing. We also knew in terms of scale that wasn't enough to have a market presence. And so the idea was, well, what if we put 5, 8, 10, 15 of them together? Could we get enough aggregate to support a cooperative of these growers? And worked with a number of really engaged folks in Mansfield, a couple of them who are with us tonight, but there are many others who've contributed to this, built some local partnerships and received funding to pilot the idea and pilot the system. And so we trained a dozen farmers. We provided the Microfarm kits, 10 of them in all. I think there are 6 or 7 of them that are now still in the Richland Gro-Op. We train these guys, as beginner farmers in commercial horticulture, and they organize their own cooperative. They own the business separate from the grant, but subsidized by the grant. And we kind of wiggled it into place over the course of 3 years. And as we were kind of doing some evaluation mid-year in the 3rd year, one of the things that jumped out was that this was a complicated system of data management, and that, figuring out how to track from the seed, because the way in which the cooperative operates is it provides a crop plan to the growers and tells them what to grow. And so taking buyers' orders, turning them into a system-wide crop plan, and then tracking those individually by farm, and then tracking them back through the aggregation facility and back out to the customers. And I think Jess and Walt can talk about the on-the-ground headaches doing all of this. But that was a significant investment of what seemed like it was a lot of repeated time. And we started thinking about, well, can we get a seed to buyer database or something that would allow us to streamline that process so that our salespeople were on a similar database as our aggregator, and the aggregator was connected to the farmers, and they're able to just sort of track this stuff in real time. Because one of our GOs, Richland Gro-Op's, really keys to success over the next couple of years is being able to know what they have when they have it, so they can communicate well if they're not. So they just can consistently have good relationships and can be pretty consistent about what's going on with all of that. One of the strategies we took, Walt, Jess, and I worked on some SOPs to kind of think about some practices and processes to kind of help at least analog streamline this a little bit. I haven't had a chance to talk to Walt and Jess about how that's going because we're all sort of busy in the busy season at this point. And they are now an independent, and we're all along an independent operating cooperative, member-owned cooperative that sells fresh produce and coordinates its microfarms.
Awesome. Thank you, Kip.
Then I'll introduce them quickly. So I'll go quickly through them and then hand the baton off. Jess Hudson is currently the aggregation manager for the Richland Gro-Op. She graduated with an English degree from Ohio State Mansfield and came up through this project through an internship and just kind of learned everything that was going on and became invaluable for it, and has been running that since January. Walter Bonham is a Mansfield native, had come back to Mansfield with these ambitions to do food and all kinds of food stuff. And we kind of met him at the right place in the right time. And he's created a company called Food Lab that does a whole lot of work inside of this system in all sorts of ways, including operations for Richland Gro-Op. And Matt Stanfield is a longtime Mansfield resident who's been involved in a whole lot of other projects and is still in a whole lot of other projects with NECIC, our partner organization. And his wife runs the Grow Forth urban farm on their property right next to their house downtown. And he's an architect himself, but also the president of Richland Gro-Op. And I'll hand it off to Matthew first, and Matt, you can hand it as you go.
I think we are having some trouble with your audio, Matthew. I don't believe you're muted, but perhaps the microphone is not selected. Can
you hear it now?
Oh yeah, there you are.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, the wrong microphone is selected apparently. So, yeah, I'm kind of here just out of interest as the president of the cooperative to see if this is something that makes sense for us as a way to track produce and to manage records. Right now, it's kind of been haphazard, although Jess has done a great job of kind of corralling some of that with some standardized, like just Google forms and sheets and stuff that, but it's still kind of hard it's hard for the farmers really to understand. To put it nicely, they're not very technologically well versed. Most of them are a little bit shy or when it comes to using technology. So having things that are kind of disparate systems that we're trying to bring together and make a system out of has also been kind of a real challenge, because it seems like every time they get used to one thing, now they have to try and learn something new. So we're kind of trying to see, is there a way that we can do something that's more cohesive, that allows the farmers more of a one-stop shop for inputting data and helping Jess as the aggregation manager to understand what produce she should be expecting.
So in a sense, like get really good at growing carrots rather than get good enough this year, then switch to tomatoes next year.
Well, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question on some of the challenges and sort of tech. So I guess a better background for me, like what sort of brought me into this is I work for a tech consultancy and we build a lot of software for companies, and a large number of our clients are in ag, mostly on the commodity crops, like cash crop side. But there's a lot of different attitudes that I've sort of observed across the spectrum of farmers that I've worked with in terms of like issues with technology. So would you say that it's more like, is it skepticism, familiarity, like literacy, trust, all of the above combo?
Yeah, my observation that it's primarily literacy, and I don't know if trust is quite the right word, but it's if it's not pencil and paper, it's just too hard.
Well, and it's a generational thing too. So those of us who have a deep anchor in the 20th century, and I think that I'm finding the same thing with the new cohort of farmers, that there are some of them who are, middle-aged, little bit older, and either aren't super familiar with or just aren't comfortable with, even if they use technology. And so that's one of the things we thought about, was like, how do we simplify this interface so that it's not overwhelming for the farmer to have to wrestle with.
Would you say, Matthew, that the trust issue there is more a matter of trust in the utility as opposed to the intentions of the software?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mistrust is kind of like under the surface. I think the mistrust really kind of stems out of the lack of comfort with the technology, more than that they don't trust that it'll do that it's supposed to do. I'm pretty comfortable with technology, and I recognize that it doesn't always do what I think it should do. But I also recognize that it's programmed by somebody who told it to do what it's doing, and no matter how much I scream at it, it's not going to change.
Right.
You
gotta scream at the developer.
Yeah. So I think it's really, as Kip said, it's kind of generational. I am in that kind of middle-aged and older generation, but there's a lack of embracing of the technology, I think, and I think it just kind of goes back to, like, Amanda is, I think, a good example, because she's just very, if it doesn't work exactly the way she thinks it should work, she's not willing to figure out how it's supposed to work. It's just like, this is no good, and I'm throwing it to the side. I'll just give me a pad of paper and a pencil, and I'm good. So I think that's kind of the getting people to understand how it's supposed to work, and trying to head off any misconceptions about how they think it should work is probably going to be key to any adoption of technology for this group of farmers.
And in fairness to Matthew and his team, my team didn't do his farmers any favors by really not considering the complexity of data management when we trained and built the system. And then we must have tried 3 or 4 different things in the process of the grant itself. And so some of their skepticism is based on real experience, and probably is well-founded based on our track record with the technology.
Got it.
And I think trying to shoehorn Google Sheets and stuff into doing something that it's not really robust enough to do probably has led to a little bit of mistrust on some of that too.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Nate, I don't know if you have any other
No.
follow-ups. I want to make sure we get to Walt and Jess. Just again, I guess to reiterate, but please correct me. Walt, you I assume have kind of more like an operational view on the production side. Would that be correct? I think you're still muted if you're trying to talk, Walt, and let us know if you're having any trouble.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Gotcha.
Yeah, out there.
All right. I got a few things going on the production side. I know Jess is this is definitely a world that Jess lives in. So just some kind of things that I noticed our biggest things is we definitely need to be able to save time on the back end of things. Our data collection and data processing and things is taking a whole like about a part-time shift right now, beyond a part-time shift, especially in the heavier times of the year. There's heavy accountability for as many farmers as we have growing multiple different crops. So you can have a farmer grow like 11 different crops that can go like 6 different places and different things like that. So the flow of our data and the data management and the ability for everything to talk to each other. And also we want to be able to create and have something that we can create a solid standard off of. So just give or take, if you guys stepped right down into RGO's kitchen and had the process of order, and we had the steps written down, that you can move through it, very smoothly, so we can, of course, help train and be able to, just notification and everything else like that, and different things to be able to make everything flow a lot better. Also, too, being able to make like updates and changes and different things like that. So, you get everything working. If you need to, make changes to things and add to this, take away from that, what type of complexity does that come with? Do we need to contact some programmers? Is this something that, we can go in and do, and things like that? Also trying to be able to manage our buyers and everything accordingly also. So, as we're just tracking everything, just being able to associate all our buyer information and all our data and things. Obviously we do a lot of things in Excel right now. So as Jess was even saying earlier, being able to run filters, a bunch of different filters, and kind of be able to be able to reference data across itself, across different data points. If I wanted to figure out like exactly how much of this I sold during this month, during this time, at these prices from this farm, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, that's yeah. It's I think a lot of people here, definitely a lot of people who are in the Skywoman group, are sympathetic to all the different unknown variables.
Yeah, and it's it's kind of one of those things like we're we're not small, but we're not too big, right? So
Right.
you're kind of like right in this like real soft space that like no way you can keep writing all this down. But then it's like, how big of a program and process do you need? We don't have 200 acres at the same time too.
Yeah. It's not all 200 acres in just corn and soy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, that's the kind of trying to figure out the best way to kind of go about that and cut some of that relief out. We even talked about, I don't know if it's going to be like scanning or barcoding or printing or, whatever the case may be. But of course, all of the different like boxes and everything that of course goes out. So we have people buying hundreds of boxes. And then we have people that are going to get a couple boxes in bags. Right. So, being able to kind of manage all that in between, whether it's the small or large orders, and just having the amount of inventory, right? So all the inventory coming in and out, being able to get that in and out of computers and process a lot faster.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I want to make sure to also get Jess in here as well.
Yep, that's all I had.
Oh yeah, no, I hope feel free to chime in. Walt Kip and Jess, Matthew, just feel free to just stay unmuted and barge in if you have something to add. But I'm also really curious to have kind of a sense of, when, kind of looking from two sides, from the production side, when a Richland Gro-Op farmer decides to, grow some cabbage, what first has to happen to reach that decision point? Like, who do they have to talk to? I know one of the more interesting things I find about your model is the way that I think Kip or Matthew mentioned earlier, of kind of having very, very selective choices based on, kind of yield per acreage or per square foot. And so, yeah, I'd love to know more about that. But then on the other hand, and this may be where, Jess, you come in, but I could also be wrong.
Right.
When there's an order, conversely, to work from the other end of the supply chain, how does that order propagate through the system? When does it come in? When is that ordering facility enabled? So like, when can somebody actually click on order 10 cases of this, or do they have to call someone? How does that look? Maybe just,
yeah. So I'm going to jump in sort of 30,000 and then hand it off to Jess, because she's the one doing this stuff on the ground. But the goal of the system, and part of what Walt and I did over the fall and winter, was to allocate as much as we possibly could in sort of pre-sales and an agreement about how much different buyers wanted of what, how often, for how long. And that is aggregated into a crop plan, which is then distributed out to the farmers. And so Walt's mantra, and I think it's a really smart one, is you don't plant anything you don't have a buyer for. I think our farmers do some things that they don't have guaranteed buyers for, and sometimes they find their own way with those, and sometimes I think they might work with the co-op. Jess can speak about that. But the idea is a cooperative crop plan of essentially pre-sold, pre-quantitied produce. And one of the nimble things about the system is we can say to the farmers, here's when you need to plant X, Y, and Z in order to get that harvest. Here's how much of it you need to plant in order to get that harvest. And they follow those instructions, and they're generally within the guardrails of those needs. So that's the 30,000 foot sort of idealized system we're trying to put in place. But Jess can talk about the day-to-day grind that she experiences.
Everybody hear me? Awesome. All right, so hi everybody, I am Jess Hudson, and I did want to kind of clarify my titles because they are not nearly described in just aggregation manager. So I am the aggregation manager for Richland Gro-Op, but I also do the crop planning, which means I also am the seed buyer, which means I do all of the purchasing. I am the deliverer. I am Walt's other hand of marketing, and I also do the invoicing in regards to accounting. So I guess it would be more like, if it is aggregation, but, it's kind of almost on that warehouse style level because of the extra stuff that I do take care of. But it is, still small. So, but nonetheless, I have, just real quick, I was a farmer, like Kip said, at the demonstration farm. I went through training with everybody else. So the standards in regards to, what everybody else has in regards to the cooperative members, like I did the same training they all did. Even had a hand in organizing, some of the behind the scenes paperwork. And then, we started transitioning over. I started transitioning over to the aggregation last July, August. I want to say it was August. And then became full-time January 17th of this year as the aggregation manager / crop planner. And in regards to the having as a farmer and having done the labor and seen my stuff sit on a shelf, you know, that's kind of where the push with like Walt and Kip came into play in regards to, no, we sell and then we grow. Because, you know, you see a lot of waste and it's very, you know, cataclysmic to your soul, essentially. You know, to call all kinds of stuff, you know, food, produce, whatever that could have been sold, could have been given away, so on and so forth. So we switched over to that. And it has been the experience of a lifetime to step into the aggregation space and work all of these angles from, like I said, you know, getting the culmination of, you know, what the buyers are looking for. And then, you know, building that out over the course of the year. And believe it or not, I literally just finished fall winter because just things got so crazy. 6 weeks ago, you know, because it's just, you know, I was able to get the first half of the year through summer and then, you know, was kind of trying to see where we were going to, you know, shake for the last half of the year, which everything's, you know, it's great. Carrots are great. Carrots are number one, I have to say. But anyways, in regards to the aggregation, it's been such an experience because, like I said, I not only do the seeds, but, you know, I'm ordering the supplies. So I have an inventory sheet that is seed on one tab, and it's, you know, then boxes and, you know, all the aggregation accessories, you know, necessities. Let me rephrase that, for the kitchen. But then I have to also, for the aggregation, look at the clerical aspect of it, and, you know, having the right, you know, I'm pen and paper. Right now it's easier because of the system that the Google sheet that we have is just, it was a great tool to begin with, but it is absolutely disastrous in the heat of the year. When I am filing an order to make sure that all my, you know, producers get the correct quantity and poundage and, you know, cases and all this stuff, and one order consists of, you know, 55 line items, that's insane for, you know, just a couple cases of, you know, we'll say 10 cases of tomatoes. That's being unrealistic, let's put it that way. But nonetheless, that is what I've experienced. So that has been the craziest part about it, is because I have an inventory sheet. We do projections. So this is where, you know, they're talking about wanting a system that kind of sets up what the output should be, which at this point I already know almost off the top of my head for most crops because I've looked at the numbers so much. But, you know, for our farmers, we have to manually do everything. So when we build out a production sheet that each farm has so that they all can enter their own information, we have to manually enter in all the data. Like, there's just so many. So, you know, it's one of those things, like, to have something where if I entered the seed and then, you know, you watched it just grow from there, from, okay, well, it got, you know, this seed went to this person, and then, you know, they seeded it at this time by, you know, because they had access to enter that information. And then to turn around and so they could enter in the harvest, and then we can see what the yield was to the square footage that, you know, that's where we go off of. We kind of done a little bit by 100 feet, but because we were trained on square feet, unfortunately, that's also where my mind goes. Just, you know, that's how we were trained. I have the capabilities of flipping it to 100 feet, 100-foot rows, you know, as like Johnny's. And Johnny's is one of our selected seeds. That's essentially who we buy from all the time. But, you know, through their graphs and models, you know, they always have 100-foot, and or it's then break down into an acreage. But we go by square feet. So, you know, there's that extra step because it's a different angle, you know, like you said, it's a different angle. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to think. There's so much. Like, I was sitting here just listening to everybody, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I could explode with so much information because it's just all aspects of it. You know, managing and making sure the produce is moving and keeping, you know, the produce organized by date so that, you know, we're hitting, like, there was a point where we were hitting about 14 days, produce wasn't moving for about 14 days post-harvest. And at this point, we're moving within 5 to 7 days. That's just, I'm kind of, I push like that, but I also, I could just use a really big system. I'm so lost in my thoughts. So if you guys have any questions to help direct anything that I might have said that you would like to expand on, I would be more than willing. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I'm at least myself going into this acknowledging that we can get the tiniest little sliver of a view on all of this that you're doing. I want to give Nate a chance. If Nate, if you have anything that you need us to kind of pause on and think a little bit more kind of how this breaks down, say so. If not, it's okay too.
I guess just my question for you, Jess, would be like, where are the kind of biggest?
I didn't hear what he said.
Sorry, guys.
We heard biggest, and that was it, I think.
My bad. I was muted. So like, what are the where are the I'm trying to in my head map out what are the biggest pain points? Like, it seems like I mean, all of this stems from the data is impossible to manage, or bordering on impossible to manage, because of it's hard to actually record the data, and that's what you can't get back in. And then on your what you're managing and then pushing out to the farmers, there's other challenges. Is it really the in between of how things move from those two different spaces of what you're looking at from the Gro-Op perspective and then pushing out to a whole bunch of individual farmers? Or is it getting it back in? Or is it that translation of things?
And I was going to say, and respectfully, it kind of, that could go both ways. In regards of, when I translate the information out, usually it's just more like the crop plan. And, we did try to designate, this year, where kind of more of a where things were going, just to make sure things were, in place and the square footage and everything was. But this next year, this fall, we started, it's more of a little bit of more autonomy for the farmers to kind of give back, their farming. But it is, with limitations in regards to if it's an overwintering crop, obviously it's going to have to go in the high tunnel. But then you said, so in the influx between,
so
and then yes. So between the produce, what I think should come in to what actually comes in. So essentially what our farmers do is they send, they link in, a projection of what they anticipate they will be harvesting over the next week. And they are supposed to have this in by 9 a.m. on Friday mornings. Okay. And then as they start harvesting and dropping off, then they have a link of which they submit their, drop off poundage, and which that does sometimes there's an issue there because it's whether they use their scale at their site or whether they use the aggregation scale. There is a flux in poundage. So there's kind of a disconnect. But then, also it's the issue of if they don't submit their drop off and they just drop their produce off. So then it's cataloging produce that, for being GAP certified, we have to keep track of, that kind of information. That's a necessity for us. So for them not to drop it off in that form, I can't say that, even though they're GAP certified, and if something were to happen and it was their product, I can't say anything because to our system, they never dropped it off. So there is that disconnect too, which does create a problem because like I said, for GAP, we have to have tracking. And if it's not tracked, but they're dropping it off and they're GAP certified and it's, it's kind of a continuous circle.
Sounds like a night.
I'm
I was going to
curious.
say, in my observation of how we put this together, data plays different roles. The same data plays different roles in different places, and so it's been integrated into the practices in different ways, and so it ends up having to be re-recorded, replicated, and remade into new sheets, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all ultimately the same data.
Yeah, and my I think for me that is my experience farming, but also dealing with farmers and marketing is, the ways in which that data, like for every carrot, how many times is it duplicated, like how many carrots you have, when you'll have them, who's calling it in over the walkie-talkie or whatever you're using out in the field, to the person who's like scratching in their notebook, to the person who puts that into a spreadsheet, who puts it into the ordering software. I'm curious, Jess, you mentioned, the kind of drop off weight, if I'm saying that correctly. Are there times? What I'm seeing, I guess, is you've got a very like rigorous model for how much each farmer should grow. So they get basically communicated, this is how much, how many pounds of peppers or how many row feet, whatever the unit you use. But in between, that the crop planning and the drop off point, what kind of checks do you have in place to confirm that things are moving more or less on target? Or is that kind of just, winging a prayer?
Well, so in a perfect world, it would be just, farm accountability, but not perfect world. So that is also where it comes into play, where I have to do audits, and I actually go out to the farms and take pictures and, write up some notes and so on, so forth, and talk to the farmers if they're there and be like, hey, what's going on with this? Or, hey, where's that? Or, hey, this is looking good. Or, things like that. So that's where the check back comes into play.
Okay, so is then you would say that mainly happens then if you yourself go physically to the point of production, to the farm, to speak with somebody, or is that something you can do on a phone call?
Good question.
It needs to be, yeah. I think it needs to be her eyes on the actual production. Part of that is because we are new farmers, and for the most part, we're still, even 3 years in, there's still a lot to learn on what we're doing. What might be causing this or that, or even what a healthy plant looks like in relation to when it was planted to when it should be harvested. So I mean, kind of along those lines, like having a system where those audits could be recorded and adjust the projected harvest date based on the status of the crops at any given point in time, I think would be really something that would help Jess in understanding when to expect what also.
Yes, I agree with that, Matthew.
Yeah, I'll time check too, because we've got about 15 minutes, and I'd like to make sure we have a little time to kind of figure out next steps. Because, like I say, we're not going to cover everything. This is kind of just to kind of get a sense of the terrain and understand your process and how that works. So, bear in mind, like, are there things, I guess, that you would just identify as like low-hanging fruit things that if I knew this one thing or these two things or whatever, my week would, I'd have, 10 extra hours, not chasing that one thing, or if anything like that kind of salience stands out. And if not, I know also Laurie was asking in the chat what other tools you use besides Google Sheets, if any, like maybe for orders and things.
Yeah,
I would
what
say
I was just
go ahead,
what
Jess.
came out on there was Excel and QuickBooks, so that's what I use on my end.
Oh yes, thanks, and thank you, Kip.
And when we say QuickBooks, we don't really use QuickBooks. We just have it,
Gotcha.
unless something's changed since the last time I was told.
We have definitely been exploring QuickBooks online, yes, because we are not utilizing it the best we can.
Sorry.
I was just gonna ask as like a quick follow-up, since we were talking about these like site visits and like checks that you need to do for audits. Jess, what would be, so like let's say all of a sudden tomorrow you're gonna do some site visits to audit what people are growing, and you have an app and it has a feature that you just tap on it. What are the input fields that you want to be capturing from those audits?
On timeness, however you want to, sorry, that's not politically correct, but disease, pests,
Are visuals crucial in that? Like having
and yes.
like here's a plant, if there's what maybe it's a little yellow on the edge of this leaf,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. No, definitely, because I always take photos. I take photos and that's what I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, what do I do?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, actually just walk us through what do you actually do.
Okay, so when I get to the site, I take a picture standing back to kind of get the site in a whole view, so that if there's anything that pops out later on, weeds, maintenance, so on and so forth. And then I walk into the tunnel, first one, second one, doesn't matter, and start observing the plants and their status, where they're at in their growth development, their harvesting, how, is it fruiting yet, those kinds of things. But then I'm also, like I said, looking for the yellowing. So I'm looking at the leaves and I'm looking for pests, and I'm trying to think, if we're outside, I'm looking for, depending on what season. So if it's summertime, I'm looking for like low tunnels, low shades, on like, certain crops. Checking the watering, making sure everything looks pretty, I'll just walk through, check the watering, see if everything looks pretty evenly distributed.
Make sure they've got the right square footage planted, don't you?
Yes, I look to make sure that the minimum is planted. But then I do also take note if there's extra, which there usually is, because the beds are all different sizes. So in regards to their widths. So yes, and then I also take note of what extra stuff that's not on the crop plan that there may be potential they might want to sell. And then, just general observations in regards to like the weed management, and, do you have like tools and stuff just laying around, or is there, so is there clutter? Is it organized? Just kind of trying to get a feel for everybody.
Yep. And how often do you visit each of the sites? Like, what's the frequency?
Ideally, it would be every 2 weeks, but that is not how this year went. It was more like in the high seeding, high transplanting season. Then the seeding states, I was out there checking and making sure everything was at least moving, so on and so forth.
Got it.
Is that because that's the most critical kind of point, you would say, Jess?
Yes, I would. I would say that is most critical. And then I will check, you know, if I'm starting to see fluctuations, if something's been harvesting and you know, I know the consistent poundage and I'm seeing a decrease, that is also a need for a farm visit, is if the harvest starts shifting.
Got it.
And right now we benefit from the fact that Jess is incredibly intelligent and organized, and we only have you know, a little over half a dozen farmers. But ideally, this would be the kind of system where there could be 110 farmers, and you know, Jess would not have to have that all in her head.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, that's another thing that, you know, I tend to zero in on is, you know, the data is, it's manageable so long as, you know, it only has to be in Jess's head. But it's, I feel, and correct me if this is like, you don't experience this or you do experience this, Jess, but when it's hardest when it has to get out of your head or out of somebody else's head into your head, so you can make those internal calculations that, like, you know, no software is ever going to be able to manage that in some respects, right? I also, I'm really curious, and I know we're going to be running out of time soon, so I think it would be great if, you know, if we look to, you know, kind of what expectations you all have going forward. There's other things I'd really like to zero in on, like, you know, like what kind of like margins for error or like just like safeguard measures you take, and like, you know, how much additional output do you just assume is going to, you know, become, you know, get lost to disease or, you know, whatever happens in the year. Yeah, I like this idea of, you know, looking at these audits as like a really good window probably into a lot of the process. You know, I think you manage a lot of this complexity by having, you know, having very rigorous planning, whereas other farmers I know tend to work more reactively, to create headaches sometimes. But yeah, so just Kip and maybe Matthew, I don't know, you know, maybe like looking at like kind of the, you know, 3,000-foot view again, like kind of what you see as like entry points for, you know, we're a volunteer community of people who are interested in these things, who are trying to find ways that we can, you know, make real economic difference in these areas. But right now, as we're exploring, like, what are the do you think would be the most fruitful ways to explore this in the future, near future?
Well, I think there's probably two layers of needs here. One is the kind of acute needs of Richland Gro-Op, to you know, try to get a better system, as it were. And I think so that's one. Mine is a little bit larger in trying to get something like this together, in that you know, I've developed a training program for micro farmers. We're in our second training cohort in Marion right now, and you know, given, well, one, if RGO can get this together, that's critical for me, because we want to see their success, because it helps to prove the model, and so this helps them. But the model in the training would ideally include a system like this, so that you could overcome in the training the kinds of obstacles that Matthew experiences with his farmers, and that we're experiencing as we're using Excel and the kind of old method in Marion as well, so that somewhere down the road, when we're in the process of training micro farmers, that the technology backbone is a part of the system, and part of what makes the system more successful over time. But Matt, you can speak for the co-op.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it kind of goes back to ease of use, and like, is this something that we can get our farmers to adopt, and is it something they can have on their phone, so they can just input it right from their phone while they're in the field, instead of having to come in and like power up their laptop and then try to remember what they did out in the field and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the other thing is kind of for me, like robustness and scalability is important, because my experience with software is if it's robust enough to handle a complex system, it's too robust for a simple system. So how do you bridge that gap between something that is robust enough for 10 farmers, or simple enough for 10 farmers, but robust enough for 100 farmers? And that's, I think, kind of where a lot of specialized technology tends to kind of fall flat, is that scalability and how well it works at the small scale and the large scale.
Yeah, I can ditto that for sure. We're going to wrap up, I think, but I want to thank everybody for taking this time, especially second week of August. I know is such a crunch time. I think as the Skywoman team kind of reviews these materials and puts it together, I'm going to make sure, like I said, to follow up with everyone who contributed today, to just make sure we can share what in that repository for all people to review. But I think we're also going to take some time to look at this as a group and see ways that we want to try to tease things apart and maybe follow up. If we have, I'm sure we'll have lots of other questions. So yeah, thanks again, and yeah, let's keep working towards this. We're going to have another conversation with a aggregated CSA in upstate New York in a few weeks with Tiana Kennedy. It's the 607 CSA. And I think we're going to see a lot of similarities there, but also a lot of differences. So I think as that'll start to give us something to kind of triangulate on like what are some common issues, what are the differences, what kinds of things can we generalize, and what kinds of things you just can't. Like I think, like you're saying, Matthew, right? It's different for 10 farmers versus 100 farmers, especially when software gets involved. So yeah, is there anything else anybody wants to say? Thank you, Nate, of course, for being.
Jamie, I wonder if I could share my screen for a second. Is it possible for me to do that here?
Sure. I think you should have the permissions, but let me know if you get blocked.
Sorry about that. No, it doesn't. I think my Chrome won't let me. I think my Chrome is. But I've got a scheme of I think I showed it to you, Jamie, of the aggregation system and the data movement in it. Just sort of a simple, from a complex disaggregation into aggregation, disaggregation, and then back. And that's the challenge here, I think, for this. And I think that one of the things that there it is. Yep.
Yeah, I love it.
And so it's the same data, right, with some different roles at different times, but it's there is a kind of anchor in what's the core of what's going on here in terms of we're a produce system, so there's only so many things. It's just that its movement into and out of aggregation is. And then each one of those microfarms on the left is its own unique place as well. And so figuring out how to get that as standardized so that Jess can keep up with that.
Yeah.
And I think so. The other thing I was going to say, I'm in a lot of conversations with folks who are doing urban agriculture and small farm, and I think that the problem of small farm agriculture is best solved through cooperative. A lot of people are starting to see that. And so having something that does small farm cooperative aggregation, and this kind of tracking exists, but it's the scale problem. It exists on the state level where they have marijuana programs. Every single one of those states has these incredibly robust seed to buyer tracking. So it's doable, right? But that's the kind of thing we need for this moderate scale operation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of, I think sometimes what problems you choose to just kind of simplify, and kind of pare down and like focus on kind of this one part that will become sort of your main
Okay.
main niche, I guess, really.
Yep.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate your time. Nice
Likewise.
to see you guys from RGO as well.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Sure.
excited about what we can come up with. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks again, Walt. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
And big thanks
Have
to
a good
Nate
one,
for
guys.
recording
Thanks
all
for
that.
putting it together, Jamie.
Thanks for joining.